Thank you for coming to today's book forum on the new book out just last week, Mere Economics by Carden and Caleb Fuller. We have Art with us here today. Before I introduce Art, I should introduce the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I believe most of you are familiar with CEI. We are a think tank based in Washington, D.C., and our mission, as it says on the screen over there, is to reform America's unaccountable regulatory state. We do that through a combination of spreading liberal values, of sound policy analysis, of engagement with Capitol Hill and with regulatory agencies, and sometimes by suing the government. We do all these because we believe in economic freedom. We believe that economic freedom leads to personal freedom, and that is the secret to progress, prosperity, and all of the liberal values that most of us here believe in. That's what CEI is all about. Our author is very much in step with those values. Art is an economics professor at Samford University, not to be confused with Stanford, down in Alabama. He holds affiliations with, tell me if I counted this wrong, 5 different think tanks.
Sure.
You co-edit the Southern Economics Journal, and you have written several books, including one with Deirdre McCloskey, who was here in the office earlier this week. And you have 2 more books upcoming, including one with Deirdre.
Yes, that is true.
In addition to all this, you still find time to be a husband and a father of 3.
Yep.
And apparently a good one at that. So my first question for you is, how do you do it?
How do I do it? Well, gosh, that's a really good question. I work hard to manage my time well. That is important, and I also try to help my kids and the people around me manage their time and energy well. Also through the judicious care and feeding of co-authors for a lot of our projects. So, for example, this book with Caleb Fuller, this would not exist if Caleb had not emailed me a couple of years ago. And of course, the other book with Deirdre, the books with Deirdre, those are co-authored projects. Forthcoming books are co-authored projects, and lots and lots and lots of coffee as well. So these are some of the inputs. And I'm still learning how to say no to things.
That is a useful skill.
Yep.
The original meaning of economics comes from ancient Greek, oikonomia.
Yeah.
Which basically means household management. And although professionally you practice a different kind of economics, that seems to be what you have mastered in your planning and professional life.
Mastered is a strong word, but yeah.
Well, you're doing better than I am. Before we get to the book, I still want to talk a little bit more about you. And I'm curious as to what introduced you to the economic way of thinking in the first place.
Wow. So the thing that really introduced me to the economic way of thinking, the light bulb moment probably was when I was taking a Principles of Microeconomics class at the University of Alabama. And I thought, this is the most amazing thing I've ever really encountered. I thought about money before, and I'd done some investing when I was in high school, very poorly, and was interested in economics and public policy, but it wasn't really until I started taking economics classes that my eyes were opened to the economic way of thinking. And then after I took Principles of Macro, I decided I want to devote the rest of my life to this. And lo and behold, here I am, having devoted the rest of my life to it, written a couple of books and taught a bunch of classes, and life's pretty good.
One of your comparative advantages is communicating economic ideas. How did your early exposure to economic ideas, both what you grasped right away, what gave you those aha moments, and also the more difficult or the more tedious parts, how did both of those influence the way that you communicate economic ideas to people?
So part of it is the obvious stuff, the things that really, again, the light bulb moments for me. I want other people to have that experience, and I want other people to gain that understanding. Being able to see the world through the lenses of the economic way of thinking is, first of all, it's an opportunity to have understanding, I think, on a level that is otherwise unavailable. And then also it's astounding and humbling to see, now humbling is the wrong word, and I'm using it incorrectly. It's astounding to see how beautiful the order of the social world is. And again, my hope with the basic stuff is for people to sort of be able to see the whole world in the living color that economics makes possible. And then with the more difficult stuff, to really dig in and see some of the finer details.
How did your collaboration with Caleb for this book come about? You mentioned that he emailed you a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so the collaboration with Caleb started with, it actually started with CEI. Years ago, in 2012, actually Deirdre McCloskey and I were both in the CEI iPencil movies, and we were both filmed in Chicago. And I emailed her to say, hey, I was going to be in Chicago for the filming for the CEI event, or the CEI iPencil movies. Let's have lunch. We had lunch. At that lunch, she asked if I wanted to co-author Leave Me Alone and I'll Make You Rich, or what became Leave Me Alone and I'll Make You Rich. And then years later, after the book was finally published, I was doing a webinar for Liberty Fund on Leave Me Alone and I'll Make You Rich. And I mentioned during the webinar that for years I've wanted to write a book called Mere Economics, something that explores the intersection of my faith and my discipline, and that really focuses on the basics and the essentials, the way that C.S. Lewis does in Mere Christianity. And I got an email afterward from Caleb Fuller, who was one of the participants in the webinar, saying that he too also wanted to write a book titled Mere Economics that was about the intersection between his faith and his beloved discipline of the dismal science that focuses on the essentials in the way that C.S. Lewis does in Mere Christianity. So we decided that since we basically had the same idea, that we would go ahead and move that to the top of our projects list and write the book together. And it was a labor of love, and here it is.
Oh, and having read the result, it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Our beloved leader, our leader, Kent Lassman, likes to ask the same question of every author that he interviews. And that is, who's your audience?
So the audience for this book is, well, first of all, anyone who can read. So, okay, now let me back that up. Anyone with money, okay? Anyone with money who's looking to buy something. Okay, you want to do your Christmas shopping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As he mentioned my family, my kids are age 16, 14, and 12, which means that they are calorie vacuums. You can imagine what our grocery bill is like. But more specifically, our audience is people who want to see kind of what Vienna or Cambridge and Jerusalem have to say to each other. So is there a possible conversation to be had between the Christian faith and the economic way of thinking? We want theologians in particular to think more economically. We want economists to think more theologically, and we want people to understand that economics isn't just something you do. It's part, I would argue, of God's good created order. I say to my students, and I think we riff on this a little bit in the book. The Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. Well, so does the dynamic version of the quantity theory of money. And I think when that's what we want to see. I want people to have Beethoven's Ninth like playing in their head while they're doing economics problem sets and looking at supply and demand diagrams and calculating elasticities.
Markets are all about making connections between people who are unlike each other, who may not even like each other.
Right.
Sounds like that's exactly what you're trying to do with Mere Economics.
Yeah, we're trying to. So ideally, the book we wanted to write a book that would make a socialist make a socialist embrace free markets and make an atheist become a Christian. My hope is that we've accomplished maybe one of those. I'm not sure which one, but we'll see. We'll see.
You borrow your title from C.S. Lewis, who wrote a famous book called Mere Christianity, and he has a deliberate sense in which he uses that term. You have a deliberate sense in which you use Mere Economics. Can you explain those?
Yeah, so if you look at public policy right now, I think this is where it's kind of in high relief. As a profession, the economist, we've kind of lost the plot a little bit, and it's a lot of fun to argue about minutia of theoretical models and specific empirical details like, was the elasticity of this with respect to that? Was it 0.4? Was it 0.35? We can fight about that all we want, but I think fundamentally the problem in the world and the problem in public policy is not that people don't appreciate market failure, it's that people don't appreciate markets. And that's where economists have the most to contribute to the world, is helping people understand how a decentralized market economy makes it possible for strangers who may not care about one another, who may not pray the same way or like the same things or anything like that, can nonetheless cooperate to mutual advantage. So my guess is that not every person in the world who catches fish believes in God or is Roman Catholic. And yet, people in the world catch fish that Roman Catholics eat on Fridays because, as I understand Catholic foodways, red meat, chicken, poultry, etc., that's verboten on Fridays. You can eat fish, and lo and behold, these people who don't share the same worldview are able to cooperate to mutual advantage. And I think there's a certain beauty to that for which the word beauty is, I think, the right word. Yeah.
How does your book complement more secular defenses of markets and defenses of liberty? And I'm thinking of books like Virgil Storr and Ginny Choi's Do Markets Corrupt Our Morals, and others similar to that genre.
So first, I think it's grounded in a particular moral worldview. So it's grounded in a particular moral worldview, that being the Christian gospel. And it's not just, hey, we kind of all agree that we should be nice to each other, or we all agree that maybe people have rights. We try to understand why people have rights, and we try to understand how, if there is in fact a God who created the universe, and if in fact the Christian gospel at its most fundamental is true, what are the implications for how we can and do interact with one another? How can the act of buying a bag of Cheetos be not just an effort to get a snack, but an act of worship, something that shows us the glory and goodness of our very God? And lest you think I'm being glib talking about Cheetos, a few months ago we visited my sister and her family in Minneapolis, and my brother-in-law's Korean. I had never in my life had a Korean corn dog. Ooh. And yeah.
I am intrigued.
You should be. I got a Korean corn dog, and it was a Korean corn dog that had been rolled in flamin' hot Cheetos. And as I'm eating this, I'm thinking, my goodness, the heavens declare the glory of God. The dynamic version of the quantity theory, money declares the glory of God. Flamin' hot Cheetos wrapped around, mozzarella cheese and a hot dog also declares the glory of God. Okay. And as you can probably tell, I'm a little more worshipful in that regard than I probably should be. But.
That's funny. That is very funny.
Yeah.
Another genre this book is a part of is, and I think it's a fantastic entry in it, is the great introduction to the economic way of thinking books. And I have in mind books like The Armchair Economist by Stephen Landsberg or David Friedman's Hidden Order. Your co-author had a pretty good one a couple of years ago. I reviewed that for CEI.
Oh, yeah.
This is, I think, the next one in that tradition. But that's an awful lot of repetition, isn't it? What does Mere Economics add at the margin?
Different authors. So that's part of it. And again, I can pay my grocery bill with what people spend on Mere Economics. But no, that's a fair question, because there are a lot of great introduction to economics books out there. There's also a subgenre of books about kind of the intersection between economics and faith. I don't think that there's anything out there that accomplishes the integration the way that Caleb and I at least try to. I think this is a step in that direction. And the way I describe it to my students when I think about the kind of place that Samford University is, it's a very Christian school in Birmingham, Alabama. You mentioned it's not to be confused with Stanford. One is a serious intellectual establishment. The other is on the West Coast. And I'm not entirely joking when I say that. If you're looking to send your children to a serious place where serious people do serious work about serious subjects, but no one takes themselves too seriously, you should strongly consider Samford University.
That sounds like CEI.
Well, there's a reason why we're here. I think there's a lot of mutual affinities. But yeah, to that end. Let's see. Integration between faith and works, kind of place that Samford is. Okay, great. Yes. So thinking about where my train of thought is now. there's a lot of stuff at the intersection of, say, faith and economics or faith and liberty or faith and whatever that seems to be sort of like, let's take the introductory economics classes I took at the University of Alabama and sprinkle some vacation Bible school on them. And then that's faith and economics, or that's the link between economics and the Christian faith. I think about it in my courses. I think about it too in the context of the work that I do. How do these things integrate? And how specifically do my convictions about economics and the economic way of thinking flow from a Christian worldview? And if human beings, in fact, bear the image of Almighty God, that puts some very, very sharp boundaries on what we can and can't do to one another, even for one another's good. So notice a CEI's mission to reform America's unaccountable regulatory state. A lot of America's unaccountable regulatory state is, I would argue, not consistent with appropriately respecting the liberty, dignity, and humanity of entities that bear the image of God. Again, we might be doing it for paternalistic reasons. We might have all of the best intentions in the world, but as David Schmitz has put it, if your best argument is that your heart is in the right place, then your heart is not in fact in the right place. And our hope is that this will help people recenter their hearts and get their hearts into the right place.
You know, when I said the word repetition a minute ago, I saw my colleague Jeremy Lott wince, as he often does when I speak. But I think there's value to that, and I think F.A. Hayek, one of our favorite economists, had something to say about that. He said that the values of liberalism need to be restated with each new generation. And Armchair Economics came out in what, 1995?
About that, yeah.
That book is 30 years old. It's time, even if it's saying the same thing, saying it in a different way to a different audience, to different people. I think there's a lot of value in that. But you don't just do books, you also do memes.
Yes. So if you go on Facebook and look for a page called Economics in One Meme, it's kind of dormant. I haven't really touched it in a very long time, but I guess 2010 or 2011, I thought, okay, how do I reach current generations of kids? And at the time, the kids these years were making memes. So I thought, okay, great, I'll start making economics memes. And I got a Facebook page out of it and some lecture slides, and now I keep wanting to tell my 12-year-old, because he's much more in this world than I am now. Like, I want you to keep up with meme culture for me and let me know what memes do I need to create so that the kids these years will know that when I show up like Steve Buscemi with music band shirt and the skateboard saying, "How do you do, fellow children?" Like, what messages do I need to in fact actually be communicating?
But you also do not just books, op-eds, scholarly articles. You edit the Southern Economics Journal. You work in all these different avenues. Do they have different skill sets, different audiences in mind? How do you manage that communications versatility, and how do you strategize that? I'm asking because as a think tank, that's very similar to what we do as well.
So there's two points, or there's two sort of goals here. One is just to satisfy my own curiosity, and I want to know how the world works. If your kids grew up on Sid the Science Kid, I loved Sid the Science Kid. How does this thing work? How does that stuff change? Why does that do it? It just did. Okay, this is the Sid the Science Kid approach to the world, like looking under rocks and seeing what wiggles. And then also, I want other people to have that experience, to be able to advance in their own understanding, and trying to find ways to communicate that to different audiences. Again, is a long-term project, and one that I think economics and the economics profession needs to do a little bit of reckoning on now, because we've known for 2.5 centuries. More than that, in fact, but at least 2.5 centuries that free trade is great. And lo and behold, what is the issue that was on the front page of the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, every newspaper in the country this morning? Tariffs and tariff policy. So one, we need to understand that the mercantilist fallacies of the 18th century were fallacies then, they're fallacies now. Two, it is entirely possible that tariffs are a good thing, however you choose to define it, but no one seems to be making the arguments for that yet. So I'd love for us to be able to get past the mercantilist fallacies so that we can have the more serious discussion.
Yeah, I mean, just yesterday, some of us on the staff were having a discussion about just that. The values of liberalism need to be restated every generation. One reason for that is because the values of illiberalism, every time they've been defeated in argument, they keep coming back. We are making today the same arguments that Frederick Bastiat made in the 1840s, that Adam Smith made in the 1770s, that Montesquieu made in the 1740s, that the Spanish scholastics made in the 1500s. A lot of repetition. And Jeremy did not wince this time.
Wincing about something unrelated.
Yeah. But
Well, this too, when I think about what the ivory tower should be doing, obviously arguing amongst ourselves is cool, but we do spend a lot of time seeking to speak and to hear some new thing. But when we study the history of economic ideas, we realize it's important, I think, to realize that a lot of what we think is so cool and new and interesting is either already in Adam Smith, or it's in Frederick Bastiat, or it's in Karl Menger, or it's in something someone else wrote 200 years ago where they probably said it better and more clearly than we can and do.
I agree. Well, enough about you. Let's talk about the book and let's talk about economics.
All right.
What is economics about? A lot of people think it's about money, but I don't think either of us believes that. What is economics about?
No. So one of the chapters in the book explains the economic errors and the economic essentials. And the number one economic error is to think that economics is all about money. You can't seal off a part of understanding the world and say, well, okay, this is all about money, but there's all sorts of stuff other than money that matters. Economics is concerned with all that stuff too. Economics is about choosing. Economics is about choice. Economics is about comparing one course of action to another and deciding, like Robert Frost, which road to take, the one that's well traveled or the one not taken.
I like that a lot. You give, to illustrate that, 9 economics lessons in the book. If you were allowed to choose only one for your readers to remember, what would it be?
I would say number one, economics is about choosing. Any choice is an economic choice. Any choice is an economic decision. I've seen economics defined as the study of human action and its unintended consequences. And sometimes those unintended consequences are great. You know, Frederick Bastiat said Paris gets fed, even though nobody intends for that to happen. And sometimes those unintended consequences are pretty lousy, as when we create unemployment or spread poverty through programs like minimum wages and rent control and all the other stuff we talk about in this book and elsewhere.
Now, your and Caleb's book comes at economics from a religious perspective. How do you reconcile religious views hostile to markets with religious views more appreciative of markets?
Well, it's going to depend. It's going to depend on which religious views. But the glib answer is to say that the religious views hostile to markets are wrong. My particular religious views, if again we believe that people bear the image of God, I think that suggests that we can't use other people merely instrumentally. And of course, we talk about old ideas. Of course, like Immanuel Kant said that. So this is maybe kind of old wine in new wineskins. But I think when we really think hard about what we're trying to accomplish and what our religious beliefs are telling us, I think it gets beyond just merely thinking in terms of, well, wouldn't it be nice if everybody had enough? Wouldn't it be nice if Billy over there had a new bike, and we could take money from Elon Musk in order to make that happen? Where economics, and in particular the sort of economics as a science of a free society, helps us is in seeing how, when we abstract beyond the family, the small group, the community, this decentralized network of cooperation among strangers makes it possible for Billy to have the bike while Elon Musk has whatever his net worth happens to be right now. 80
less than a week ago.
Yeah, less than a week ago. And it also helps us understand that Billy doesn't have a bike for reasons other than the fact that Elon Musk has a 9-figure net worth. Wait, 9-figure net worth?
Doesn't matter.
Okay, yeah. I'm tired. 12-figure net worth, I think. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, yeah, 9-figure net worth. Some number of numbers. A lot of money.
A gazillion.
A gazillion, yes. Thank you. Yeah, the technical term. A gazillion dollars is what Elon Musk is worth. One of the most popular books in sort of the world of Christianity over the last 50 years is Ron Sider's book, Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger. And it is part of a long and venerable tradition of books by Christians blaming poverty on prosperity. And again, this I think is an important part of our argument, is that other people are not poor because we are rich. Trade is not a zero-sum game, and embracing the economic way of thinking and liberalizing markets makes it possible for us to all have a future of abundance.
It's a positive sum world,
Yes,
not a zero-sum
it absolutely
world.
is.
You and Caleb do a fair amount of myth busting in the book, and you do a particularly good job taking on the idea that capitalism, like you and Deidre, I don't like the term,
Right.
markets, innovism, I think it's Deidre's term,
Yep.
is built on the backs of slavery and colonialism and exploitation. How do you answer that charge?
Yeah, so that I think it's an important historical fact and an important thing to keep in mind, because again, it's an idea that has gained currency more and more in the last, say, decade or so. There was a history book making the claim that half of U.S. output in the antebellum period was due to slavery. I know Ta-Nehisi Coates has repeated that, and it's become part of the zeitgeist. It's also part of my answer to the student who asks, when am I ever going to need to know anything about this when we're talking about national income accounting? Okay, sure, C plus I plus G plus NX seems pretty boring. And the idea of GDP as a measure of total value added in the economy, again, also seems pretty boring. But making sure you're getting the national income accounting straight is essential if you're going to do the history correctly. And in the case of history, it turns out that slavery's contribution, and note the gigantic scare quotes here, to American economic growth was trivial. And furthermore, to the extent that it contributed, and again, note the gigantic scare quotes, it had nothing to do with the fact that it was slavery. It was the fact that enslaved people produced stuff, and in fact, stuff that they would have produced almost certainly much more efficiently had they not been enslaved in the first place. Furthermore, one of the points that we make, and this builds on some of the work that Deirdre McCloskey and I have done, if slavery per se could create a great enrichment, it would have happened a long time ago, and it would have happened somewhere else. The historian Neil Ferguson describes imperialism, for example, as the least original thing that Europeans did after 1492, and you could say the same thing about slavery in the New World. Slavery's existed pretty much always and everywhere. If slavery per se could create a great enrichment, it would have happened a long time ago somewhere else. And in particular, Portugal and Brazil would have been the great industrial powers of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, not England and the United States.
Yeah, slavery is practically a human universal. There have always been empires, and yet all of them, until slavery was abolished and colonialism went away, were crushingly poor.
Yes.
Not just poor, but crushingly poor.
Yes.
Compared to modern standards.
Yeah. Now that's not to say that specific individuals didn't get rich because of slavery. One of the oft quoted pieces of data in what's called the New History of Capitalism is that there were more millionaires in Mississippi, I think, than anywhere else in 1860 or so. But just because
and that is inflation adjusted, right?
I don't think it's inflation adjusted. I think it's actually in nominal terms.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, and being a millionaire in 1860 is very different from being a millionaire today. But it's important to keep in mind that just because a particular set of institutions benefited one person doesn't mean that it benefited the entire society. So again, in calculations that economists have done looking at the British Empire, okay, sure, the crowned heads of Europe, Leopold in Belgium, or the Queen of England and the royal family, they got richer because of imperialism. But the average person in England, Belgium, etc., was worse off and is worse off because of these sort of colonial and exploitative adventures.
One of the key ideas in your book is what you call makers and takers framing, and thankfully you don't do it in the Ayn Rand sense. Can you explain what you and Caleb mean by makers and takers?
Yeah, so when we're talking about makers and takers, one of our messages in the book is for the people who want to make the world a better place. And as I told my students now after writing this book, if I were to summarize my entire philosophy on life in 4 words, it would be make more, take less. Make more, take less. Part of this actually is inspired by the economist James M. Buchanan and some work I did on his book, Ethics and Economic Progress. And we see so frequently that a lot of our efforts to help people deliberately just don't work. History is full of examples. So if we want to actually help people, working a little bit harder, working a little bit more efficiently is a very good way to do it, because we expand the total amount of pie in the world. So we produce more. People need real income in order to feed their families, in order to support their churches, in order to do the things that they value. Taking selfies with poor people is probably morally dubious, but the poor person with whom you're taking the selfie can't feed themselves with that selfie. They can feed themselves with real food, real income, real production. Then the take less part of it says, okay, well, if we're expanding the pie, let's consume a little bit less of the pie so that we have more of the pie available to finance even more future production, even more future consumption.
If you're looking to put a virtue on it, prudence or temperance.
Yes, absolutely.
And the objective is to grow the pie, not so much to slice it this way or that. My colleague Ian Murray is here, co-authored a paper with me years ago titled People, Not Ratios. That's very similar to that approach. Another key idea you have is that while every economics student knows about the division of labor, you talk about the division of knowledge.
Right.
What's that about?
Yeah, so division of knowledge speaks to the maker-taker point that we just discussed, because it's pretty presumptuous frequently to claim that we know what other people need. That's true of my children. I know more or less what they need. I know what their favorite foods are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know that necessarily about other people. When we work harder or work more efficiently and create more, we're able to advance the social division of knowledge. And the social division of knowledge effectively says that we're able to harness other people's knowledge, which we don't have, for purposes that other people may not approve of. Okay. Once again, my guess would be that somebody somewhere in the production process for Mere Economics, someone who works for a paper company that supplied Brahman and Holman academics so that they could produce the book, maybe they're members of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, okay, and they do not approve of what Caleb Fuller and I are doing. Nonetheless, we're able to take advantage of their specialized knowledge about paper production through this broad decentralized network that allows us, again, to cooperate with strangers. And that, I think, frankly, is pretty cool.
Same. To this point, we've been talking about some pretty lofty, big picture ideas. I want to narrow the scope a little bit.
Okay.
Tariffs have been in the news lately.
They have.
Yeah, that's been a fun one. What role does mere economics, the phrase, as you use the phrase, what can that contribute to the tariff debate?
So what it can contribute to the tariff debate is a bunch of things. First, to the layperson, an understanding of how international trade works, like the fact that it is not a zero-sum game. We're not getting ripped off because other countries are selling us stuff at very low prices. I've been thinking about this recently. I was thinking about this last night. There's an excellent Babylon Bee article from a few weeks ago where it says Trump announces that he secured unlimited chips and salsa in Mexican trade deal. Okay. And I was walking around thinking about this last night and thinking, if like, who on earth thinks that we're better off if you go to your favorite, Mexican restaurant and they say, yeah, no, sorry, no more free chips and salsa. Prices are the same, but no more free chips and salsa. No one in the right mind thinks that we're better off because of that. Mere economics helps us understand Another thing I think it does, and my hope here in speaking to the economics profession, is it's important to, again, see what we have to contribute to the world. So a lot of economists will say, well, the world isn't as simple as Econ 101. And they're right, it's not. The world's not as simple as Econ 101, and you learn an awful lot in the intermediate courses that you don't learn in the principles courses. But the kinds of arguments people are making for tariffs, once again, are not the intermediate economics arguments. They're not the advanced economics arguments. They're not the graduate level trade theory arguments. They're the arguments that Frederick Bastiat exploded in the early 19th century. They're simple mercantilist fallacies. And it would be remarkable if the policies people are embracing for silly reasons just happen to be exactly the right policies for very sophisticated reasons. That would be a heck of an accident.
Another thing your book features is a lot of good stories, and they illustrate some of the ideas. The one that resonated with me was the story of Gerard the Bear.
Yes.
To illustrate how value is subjective.
Yes, so value is subjective. This is a big idea in economics. And again, when people say, well, you can't measure everything in money. So you might have heard the old expression, an economist is someone who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. And then the person who says that laughs because they think that they've somehow owned the economists. My response to that is, okay, because we know the price of everything, we at the very least have an estimate of the lower bound on the value of everything. So what do you have? And, people usually just stop talking to me when I say stuff like that. Yeah. But in the case of Gerard, this was subjective value on steroids. In 2011, we lived in Memphis at the time. We were on our way to the American Institute for Economic Research in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, and we stopped in Harrisonburg, Virginia, to eat lunch at McDonald's. Parenthetical comment: you asked how I do it all. Well, one thing I try to do is move a bunch of stuff forward, kind of whenever I have an opportunity to, and this does not always work the way I want it to. So I wrote a blog post while our kids are playing on the playground, and I managed to get myself distracted. Anyway, we leave the McDonald's in Harrisonburg, Virginia. We stop in Hagerstown, Maryland, where we're spending the night, and we put the kids to bed and learned that our 2-year-old at the time, now 16, he is missing his stuffed panda, Gerard, which, if you like the Calvin and Hobbes comic strip, this would be like Calvin losing Hobbes. And so we put him to bed, say, oh, we'll take care of it, And my wife and I are talking and thinking, okay, we can go on Amazon and we can have them overnight. We can have them ship a new bear that looks exactly like Gerard to AIER and have it tomorrow or the next day. But it won't be Gerard. So we did what good parents do. We called every McDonald's in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and someone said, oh yeah, someone brought the bear in. They found it in the parking lot. So this is about a 90-minute drive, and I've been driving all day, and I'm thinking, I want so badly to go to bed. But I did what good dads do, and I made the 3-hour round-trip drive from Hagerstown, Maryland to Harrisonburg, Virginia to retrieve Gerard. And I would not, in that moment, or any moment, have taken $1 million for Gerard. So it might look like a stupid little stuffed panda, but it was our older son's world at that point, and appearances can be deceiving. Like I said, and I'm 100% serious about this. If someone had offered me $1 million for Gerard, I would not have taken it. So.
That is a beautiful illustration of how that works.
Yeah, I hope so.
You open the book about something less beautiful, which is burgers and beer. And you tell that through the lens of iPencil.
Yep.
Why did you choose that story to start the book?
I think just because for whatever reason, I was thinking about the X number of people walk into a bar kind of joke, and I thought, what's a good opening line? Something like you can learn a lot about God and man in a bar. It's like, okay, well that sounds like an interesting way to move forward. What do people do? When they sit down to eat, a lot of people will pray that God will bless the hands that prepared the food. burgers and beer. Well, I teach at a historically Baptist university, and Baptists are teetotalers, and not everyone in Christianity shares our sort of particular views on that. And in fact, most Baptists don't. They just don't really, talk about it. So that was kind of an illustration. I thought, what in a simple meal? What in a simple meal helps us to illustrate the social division of knowledge, prosperity, cooperation among people who, again, may disagree about even the most fundamental things in life. And then again, when we think about praying that God would bless the hands that prepared this meal, like that's a lot of hands when you think about the people that harvested the wheat. And importantly, that's a lot of minds. So maybe the right prayer should be, God prepare the hands and minds, God bless the hands and minds that helped to prepare this meal, including but not limited to the people who did the research and development that helped to make beef so cheap. One of the best things I've read in the Wall Street Journal in recent years is, some of you might remember this, there was a story about some scientists, I think it was in Switzerland or Austria, who managed to take some genetic residue and create a meatball made out of the meat of a long extinct woolly mammoth. So maybe in the third or fourth edition of Mere Economics, we're talking about blessing the minds of the scientists who were able to reverse engineer all of this and create mammoth meatballs that are in your spaghetti or that constitute the burger patty, again, that you'll be eating by the time the fourth edition of Mere Economics comes out.
There is a CEI tie-in here.
Yep.
Nothing to do with mammoths, nothing to do with eating extinct meat. But not only were you involved with CEI's iPencil video that came out probably a decade ago at this point, but in the book, you mention twice CEI's founder, Fred Smith.
Yep.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I didn't know Fred Smith well. We ate blueberry hand pies one time together, and he offered an explanation. In fact, we talk about this in Leave Me Alone, I'll Make You Rich a little bit as well, on his idea that combinatorial growth is more important than exponential growth.
What do you mean by that?
So combinatorics is basically the study of combinations and the study of groups. And so something like 9 factorial is 9 times 8 times 7 times 6 times 5, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he argues that that's the right way to think about sort of the explosion of ideas and the right way to think about modern economic growth rather than just exponential accumulation. But we cite him, and we discuss some of his work in Mere Economics, and we also give him credit for writing the Theory of Moral Sentiments, which he did not, in fact, actually write. That was Adam Smith in 1759. But as the great Thomas Sowell has put it, if there's ever a nuclear holocaust, the only survivors will be cockroaches and typographical errors. And one of our typographical errors is we switch 2 bibliography entries to give the impression that Fred Smith is in fact the author of the Theory of Moral Sentiments. So yeah, I had the privilege of attending his memorial service, and it gives me great comfort to think that he would have found this every bit as funny as I do. So,
oh yes.
So they're going to correct it in the second printing. So the first printing of Mere Economics, these will be the collector's items. These will be the 1989 Fleer Billy Ripken baseball cards of the free market economics book world. So, yeah.
I don't know if we should go into detail about that. Probably not.
Well,
there's a good reason that card is rare and was withdrawn, and we'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I love about economics is it can make very subtle findings and revelations, and I love this about it. One example that you talk about is that tooth decay is higher in states where occupational licensing for dentists is more expensive.
Yeah. So the law of demand is undefeated. And when you raise the price of anything, the quantity consumed goes down. And this is actually Caleb's work here. He found the site on this. There's a paper estimating the effect of occupational licensing on tooth decay I think the paper was originally published in the 1980s. I think it was in the Southern Economic Journal. And the argument is basically, okay, if you make dentistry more expensive, fewer people are going to take fewer trips to the dentist. If they take fewer trips to the dentist, their teeth are not going to be as healthy as they otherwise would. And in places with stricter dental licensing, we get more tooth decay. So the irony here is that ostensibly the reason we have this kind of regulation is in order to protect people from charlatans. But it turns out that what in fact we're doing is protecting not customers from charlatans, but dentists from customers who don't want to pay higher prices. And again, the inevitable result is additional tooth decay.
Here's a little tougher question for you. Sweatshops.
Yeah.
Defend sweatshops.
You understand when you hear a question like that, why economists are big hits at parties. Okay. And speaking of which, I'm available for speaking engagements, kids' birthday parties, you name it. If you want someone to come talk about mere economics, let me know. If you want someone to explain to your group why sweatshops should not be banned, well, I would be more than happy to do so. So economists are the kinds of people who defend sweatshops. And we don't defend sweatshops because we're heartless SOBs. We defend sweatshops because we understand opportunity cost and we understand the economics of international trade. So economists defend sweatshops not because we think sweatshops are morally good or because that's what people deserve or because people are somehow embiggened in their spirit by working in sweatshops. We defend sweatshops because for a lot of people, the sweatshop is the best of a bunch of terrible alternatives. So the way I've heard it put is you don't help people by taking away the best of their available alternatives. So the best out of a lot of very bad choices is still the best out of a lot of very bad choices. And if you take that away, people are left in situations that are worse. And in the case of something like a sweatshop, the alternatives are working in agriculture, the alternatives are looking through garbage dumps, the alternatives are things like prostitution. We defend sweatshops because they make people better off relative to their best available alternatives. Now that said, I also tell my students sometimes when they are talking about taking an alternative spring break trip or when they're talking about filling these Samaritan's Purse shoe boxes during Christmas. There's an organization called Samaritan's Purse where you can fill a shoe box and it sends Christmas presents to a kid around the world. And I'll ask my students sometimes, what is the most valuable thing you could possibly put in one of these Samaritan's Purse shoe boxes? And they'll say something like an iPhone or a bar of gold or whatever. And I say, no, the correct answer is a forged U.S. passport. Okay. If you can put a forged U.S. passport in one of these Samaritan's Purse shoe boxes, that would be the most valuable thing that you could put in there. The solution, such as it is not to prevent people from making the best choice available to them, but to expand their range of choices. And that ultimately is what is making poverty history, not anti-sweatshop movements or people who are buying, fair trade coffee.
And what has happened to poverty rates over the last, 50 years or so?
So we call this sometimes the greatest story never told, because a lot of people believe that, in fact, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And a lot of people believe, in fact, that poverty has gotten worse over the years because the rich have gotten richer and the poor have gotten poorer. In fact, the raw number of human beings living in extreme poverty in the world today is lower than it was when I was born in 1979. A lot of this having to do with the liberalization of China, but we've gone from a world in which there were relatively few people and almost all of them were dirt poor to a world of 8 billion people, only about 500 million of whom are dirt poor, living in absolute poverty the way that international statistical agencies define it. Now, of course, it's easy to respond, well, that's 500 million too many. And of course, that you're absolutely right. But 500 million out of 8 billion is much better than 4 billion out of 5 billion. That's the progress that we've made. It hasn't happened because of USAID. It hasn't happened because of international trade. It hasn't, excuse me. It happened in part because of international trade. It hasn't happened because of international aid. It hasn't happened because of my students' mission trips or things like that. It's happened by and large because we've stepped back and we've let people innovate and we've let people work and we've let people come up with cool, interesting new ideas. And we are making poverty history and doing so rapidly. Maybe not intentionally, but as an unintended consequence of liberalization.
One advantage economists have is that they tend to think of things in terms of processes that are
Yeah.
ongoing instead of see something bad, ban it, done.
Yeah.
It's more of an ongoing process. Nobody likes sweatshops. But
Right.
part of the defense of them is that it's one step in a process of human progress and human betterment. It's one way to elevate people from poverty, and the process will continue. It's not where we want it yet.
Right.
There's still a long way to go, but it's a process.
Yeah, and again, it's a sweatshop is the best. Someone who chooses to work in a sweatshop, and I use chooses deliberately, does so because it's the best of a set of very bad options. And I can't say this enough. Removing that option does not make them better off. Expanding their options makes them better off. The point I made earlier about the forged passport, you can increase someone's productivity by a factor of 5 very easily just by moving them across a border from Mexico into the United States or Haiti into the United States, by moving people from where their labor is not very productive to where their labor is very productive.
And that's the secret to prosperity. The problem is that a lot of well-intended efforts to relieve poverty have unintended consequences. And you and Caleb discussed several unintended consequences throughout your book. Can you share one or two of those?
Yeah, so again, this is so David Schmitz is the one from whom I heard this. If your argument is that your heart's in the right place and your heart's not in the right place, there's an old story of what's called the Cobra effect that might be a bit apocryphal, but there are examples of it throughout history. And the story of the Cobra effect is that colonial officials in British-ruled India wanted to do something about all the cobras. So they started putting a bounty on cobra tails, or a bounty on dead cobras. And so what people started doing in response to this was farming cobras so that they could then sell them for the bounties. And then after the British officials realized what was going on, they said, we're not going to do this anymore. So then all the cobra farmers released the cobras out into the wild, and now we have an even worse problem. One of the classic examples of unintended consequences is the way that Americans drive and the vehicles that Americans drive. We drive gigantic sport utility vehicles. And we don't do this because Americans are pigs. We don't do this because Americans are short-sighted. We don't do this because Americans are somehow benighted and ignorant. The thing that gave us a sport utility vehicle was corporate average fuel economy standards. And everyone at CEI knows this very, very well. For regulatory purposes, an SUV is a truck. And it's therefore held to different fuel economy standards. For regulatory purposes, a station wagon is a car. And so we replaced the station wagon with the SUV and got these gigantic gas-guzzling, road-hogging vehicles that so many of our friends on the left seem to think are harbingers of doom.
And the products of capitalism.
And the products of capitalism, yes.
Are in fact not.
Oh, okay. So actually, this is actually a really good, another really good example, because this went around Twitter among a lot of economists recently. One reason people drive SUVs is because of safety. And there was a recent study showing that obviously you're safer if you're driving an SUV and you have an accident, but the person you have the accident with they're worse off. Like, they're more likely to be injured, more likely to die if they're hit by someone driving an SUV. And a lot of economists said, oh, market failure. This is a perfect example of market failure. And I was looking at this thinking, no, this is not an example of market failure. We have SUVs because of the regulations that we put in place to fix a different market failure several decades ago.
My favorite quote from the book comes on page 83, and it really resonates with the message that, like our friend Deidre says, economics doesn't just come from the head.
Yeah.
It also comes from the heart. So on page 83, you say, here's a vital lesson from the division of knowledge. We need each other. Talk about that.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. Okay. We need each other in families. We need each other in communities. We need each other in the extended order of a commercial society. what you're good at, what you do, what you contribute to the world is going to help somebody on the other side of the world that you may never see, that you may never know. You may never actually, in fact, be able to make the connection. Someone who's filling out TPS reports as a middle manager somewhere in Cincinnati, Ohio, again, they may not be able to see the connection between so suppose they work for a paper company, between what they're doing and education in Africa. But by working for the paper company, filling out the TPS reports correctly, they're able to produce more paper, which allows Broadman and Holman to produce more books like Mere Economics at a lower price, which means that people in Africa can buy them more cheaply, which means that education in Africa is better than it would otherwise be. So the way that everybody should think about the job they're doing is when they're sitting and filling out TPS reports at their desk for the paper company, they're not filling out TPS reports, they're feeding and educating children in Africa.
It's all interconnected.
It is.
We all depend on each other in ways we'll never imagine.
Yep.
The book is Mere Economics, Lessons for and from the Ordinary Business of Life, Art Carden and Caleb Fuller. A few housekeeping notes. You didn't bring any for sale, but where can people get the book?
Yeah, so you can get it at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, wherever finer books are sold. If you go to Lifeway.com and want to place a bulk order, they have I think a pretty generous discount on bulk orders. So if you're looking for a class or a reading group or a small group or something like that, you can find it there.
Yeah,
and it's also available on Kindle.
Yeah, bulk orders are great. 3 kids. CEI has a few things to plug as well. In early June, we are having our annual policy summit in Bar Harbor, Maine. I hope you can join us for that. There's more information on the website, cei.org. Just click on events. And this fall, the CEI annual dinner, where we hand out our Julian Simon Award, will happen at the Organization for American States building, and the theme will be The Wizard of Oz. So keep an eye out for those. I hope to see some of you there. And with that, thanks to Art for talking to us today, and thank you for being here.